Welcome to the seventh and final session of Making Sense of the Siddur with me, Rabbi Phil Bressler. Today we're going to be talking about two prayer rubrics that are additional elements of Shabbat and holiday services. The Siddur Kriyat Torah, the service for the reading of the Torah, and Hallel. They're both coherent rubrics all their own, but are somewhat special additions to the normal service. On weekday services, our sort of baseline this whole time has been weekday shacharit. Torah reading only comes up on Monday and Thursdays during that time, but it comes up every Shabbat as well as holidays. So we'll talk about those specific units. So Siddur Kriyat Torah, the service for Torah reading. A bit of background about reading scripture liturgically. It's actually pretty common within religions that have sacred texts. There are things called lectionaries that have the appropriate Bible passages to be read as part of Christian services. We, of course, have our cycles of scripture reading as part of the liturgy. The main one that most people are familiar with is the cycle of Torah readings. Each one is called a parsha, or plural parshiot, which is fixed and continuous. It's say a cycle around and around. We read the entire Torah through the course of the year, and then roll it back and start again at the beginning. And that was actually possibly instituted very early. We talked about some of the early origins of the prayer service and the early origins of the liturgy. It's entirely possible, and we don't really know any of this for certain, that public reading of Torah actually predated any of that. We talked about the Amidah being among the oldest core elements of the prayer service. But it's possible that public reading of Torah on that cycle was started as early as about the 5th century BCE, with Ezra and the exiles returning from Babylonia. That's certainly the traditional explanation. It's hard to get a firm scholarly opinion on that because there's just a lack of evidence. So we have the cycle of the Torah, which is fixed and continuous. We also have the cycle of Haftarah readings, which in plural are called Haftarot, which is fixed but discontinuous. It's not a smooth progression through the prophetic books. We jump around and we have selections from here and there throughout the prophetic books. And this was probably instituted gradually in tandem with the Torah reading cycle. The selections it's sometimes difficult to figure out exactly why the selection is the selection. They often mirror the Torah portion thematically, or there's some sort of thematic link between the two, or some sort of similar action, some sort of similar elements. They're also frequently tied to the holiday cycle. For example, the parshiot immediately after Tisha B'Av, a day of mourning and fasting, is followed by Haftarot of consolation that aren't tied to the portion. They're tied to the fact that we just went through this symbolic reenactment of the fall of the temple. We need some sort of consolation. So they're tied to the holiday calendar that way. Note, and this is, I don't know who needs to hear this, but I always hear Haftarah thought of as the half Torah, which is, you've heard that before? Yeah. People talk about it. There's the Torah and then there's the half Torah, which makes a certain amount of sense. And Haftarah sounds a bit like half Torah, but that is not what it is. It's from a root lehaftir, pei tet resh. Haftir means to conclude something with an addition, like to write the concluding paragraph of your essay, to stick something on the end to conclude something. So that's what Haftarah does. And you have a question, please?
Yeah, I guess I hadn't realized before. Haftarahs are only from the prophets then.
Generally speaking,
they're not from the 5 books. They're from whatever came afterwards.
Correct. So I like to call that the Nach. If the whole thing is the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Okay. The Ta is the Torah. So the Haftarah is from the Nach. It's everything else, the writings and the prophets, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was something.
That's new. So that's where it comes from. It's not in any way actually really related to the Torah cycle. It's a separate cycle. So half Torah is Not right.
So they're not
Yeah.
gonna always match up the same Torah portion with the same Torah portion?
So it is fixed at this point, although because like this came together differently in different places. Generally speaking, every community reads the same Torah cycle
Right.
within reason. There are like Ashkenazim and Sephardim that will sometimes have a different haftarah for a given parsha.
But within one tradition, the two will always match up.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And there are special haftarot for holidays, which sometimes might, override, an ordinary Shabbat haftarah, things like that. So this is all, there's a book, there are books that have this kind of stuff that make the rabbi sound like he always knows what he's talking about, but really I'm just looking up in the book that has all these cycles, prepared. So, good. Yeah, please.
Now, the cycle for the Torah readings, it's kind of split over 3 years, and you get part of it going all the way around, and then the next part, and by the time you get through the third year, you've gotten it all.
That's correct. That's right. That's
So
what we
what
do here at Beit Am, what they call the triennial cycle.
Okay, so what happens with the Haftarahs then?
Same haftarahs. There's no triennializing of that.
Okay.
We still read the whole thing.
In the triennial reading, so the parsha is still the parsha, it's just what part you learn in the service?
Right. Right. So this was actually the way it used to be. Like when the Torah reading cycle was originally instituted, there wasn't the sort of standardization of we all roll back to the beginning on Simchat Torah and we're all in the same phase. So communities were out of phase with each other, and it was very common to not read the whole thing, but to actually read a third of each portion at a time, such that you would complete it over the course of 3 years. Or they might even split it up. It would take 3 weeks to read one portion and 3 weeks to read the next portion. They would split it up that way. At some point, to get everyone on the same page, they standardized it into what we know is the parsha system, where everyone would read a full, what they call full kriya, full reading, a full portion on a given week. That made sense when there were a lot of Baalei Korah, like professional Torah readers available to do this kind of thing. There was, I like to say, nothing on TV or the internet to go do. And so, the prayer book and the service really, got bloated. That became unsustainable more in the modern era, and more congregations wanted to go back to the triennial cycle because they either didn't have enough people who knew how to read that much Torah, or wanted to do other things, shorten the length of the service overall. So the conservative movement in America actually led the way with reinstitutionalizing the triennial cycle. And there is now sort of an official triennial cycle that we follow that's also in books that I can go look at. So I'm like I know what I'm talking about. So we can be on the same phase. And the way it works is we're actually in the first year of the cycle right now. So basically take any parsha divided into 3 thirds. We're reading the first third of every parsha this year.
Okay.
Next year, we'll read the second third of every parsha. The following year, we'll read the third third of every parsha.
Okay, my question still has to do with the Haftarah.
Oh, okay.
Does the same portion, the same Haftarah be read for each of the thirds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So the same haftarah in its entirety. There hasn't been any move to triennialize that.
Okay.
As far as that.
So are there still congregations that read the whole parsha each?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just
That would be particularly
difficult to do.
orthodox.
I mean, no, I've been to conservative schools that do that have enough Torah readers who know how to do it. I mean, what it looks like frequently is somebody going super fast.
Right.
I've been in the position of being asked to gabbai for those kind of folks, which means be the one to follow along and correct the mistakes. There's no correcting mistakes at that speed. There's nothing I can say or do. By the time my brain registers the error, he's 3-4 words on. So it's sort of in that way defeats the ostensible purpose of Torah reading, which is to have people hear Torah. If it goes by like that. So there's, I think, very valid reasons for the triennial cycle that make a lot of sense for a lot of communities. And that's what we do here at Beit Am. Okay. We sort of skip past, a really basic question, though, which is, why do we read Torah? What is even the point of this? I mean, and on an elementary level, it's pretty obvious. We've been commanded to do so. We've been commanded to read and study Torah. It's central to Jewish tradition to the point that it would almost be inconceivable not to do that. Like, what's the point of it if we're not going to, make it the center of our services? Moreover, there's a real benefit to it. It's how we read our story. It teaches us to see ourselves in some ways, but not in others. It teaches us, we learn to see our lives as kind of recapitulations of these stories of our people. We see redemptions like the one out of Egypt in our everyday lives. We see stories of wandering and of pain and of suffering and all the other things and of joy that all our ancestors went through. We read that onto our own lives. So I don't think I need to tell you too much, evangelize more for Torah reading here in a synagogue, but I think it's worth it to touch on that in terms of the purpose of Torah reading. So as far as the Torah service itself, what we're really talking about is the prayers surrounding the actual Torah reading. We're not going to go into anything about the actual process, what they call laning, chanting, any of that kind of stuff. That's not the topic of this class. We call it a service. You see it if you'd like to follow along in your Sim Shalom books. I'm on 139. It's labeled.
Another dumb question.
Yeah. No dumb question.
No question.
This is probably good. So when you study the portion,
Yeah.
Me. Do you go through the whole portion, or do you really concentrate on the third that we're going to be learning?
It depends. Thus far, actually, this year, I've kind of concentrated on the part that we're reading, because I think it gives your Devar Torah a little more impact when people have just read that. They're more, especially if you're going to do something that's like closely comparing verses. It's good to give people something people have just read. Two, I find restriction breeds creativity. So when you have I have to say something clever about this small bit, I have to get a little more clever. Given the whole portion, I have a tendency to sort of go back to the same wells over and over. So this year I've been doing that, but I don't necessarily have consistent practice. If someone was doing their own personal study, you could do it either way. You could definitely do a sort of triennial study. It'd be cool. It'd probably be a little bit easier, maybe a little more manageable than a full reading. Okay, so we call it the Torah service, Seder Kriyat Torah. Seder, just like Passover Seder means an order, a fixed order, but it's not technically a service. Usually the word we translate as service is avodah, corresponding to the services that went on in the temple, which, as we discussed, there's a correspondence between our 3 services of the day and what went on in the sacrifices that went on the temple. So this is not properly service because there's no Amidah in it, right? That would make it. So it's not. Yeah, proper services are Shachrit, Mincha Mariv. You could also say Musaf on Shabbat has an Amidah. Mila on Yom Kippur has an Amidah. It's its own Avodah service. However, we commonly think of the Torah liturgy as a separate service in its own right and with its own character and content. So for our purposes, we are using service colloquially to include this. And to start kind of piecing this together, I'm going to, we'll start drawing it out on the board as we like to do. There are five elements basically that go into the Torah service. For my own organization here, I'm going to try to space it out properly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start with number 2, which is the Torah reading itself. Torah reading itself. So we commonly call each of the subdivided Torah readings from whatever you're reading, whether it's the full portion or just the triennial piece. We call that an aliyah, right? Sounds familiar to most people, I would hope. Aliyah means going up. It's the same word we use to mean make it going to Israel. Israel's always up from everywhere else in the world. It means going up, and it's these days taken to indicate the physical act of ascending the bima to go up to where the Torah is, right? We don't actually have a bima here. Some places don't, but that's still what it's called. However, synagogues did actually used to have raised platforms. The best way to be heard in a big group without amplification is not to be above, it's to be below. That's why amphitheaters are designed with the stage down at the bottom. You go to Roman amphitheaters, the stage is down below and the seats are up from there. It's so that the actors and everyone on stage can be heard the best. So, and we actually in fact read in the Talmud about prayer leaders who would yored lifnei hateva, they would go down in front of the ark to lead, which indicates how this was, it was stadium seating. Everyone was up here and the ark was down below. So Aliyah, that's not always how it was. And also the Haftarah reader is never described as an Aliyah. That's something different, but it's read in the exact same place. It's still from the reading table up on the bima. So there's something a little bit weird about calling this an Aliyah in the sense just of going up. Originally, the verbal form of Aliyah, Oleh, one who goes up, was used in the idiom Oleh leminyan. So in other words, to be counted in the minyan. The number of aliyot, the number of like subdivisions of the Torah portion, varies with the occasion. There are 7 for Shabbat morning. You don't have to remember this. This is not on the test, but it is kind of interesting. Now there's 7 for Shabbat morning, which is actually the most. You would think it might be a different special day. It's not. Shabbat is the most.
It's a special number.
7 is also a meaningful number, specific, right, for Shabbat. It's also the most you're ever going to get. There's only 6 on Yom Kippur. That's the next most. 5 aliyot on every other Chag, so Rosh Hashanah, every other Chag festival day. 4 on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of every month. 4 also on Chol HaMoed, the period in the middle of multi-day festivals like Sukkot and Pesach they're part of the festival, but they're not Chag. They're higher sanctity than regular time, but not quite as much as. So there's 4 aliyot on those days, and then a simple 3 for your regular Monday, Thursday Torah readings, non-Chag holidays like Hanukkah, Purim, 3 aliyot, Shabbat afternoon, Yom Kippur afternoon, 3 aliyot. So to be counted in the minyan meant to be one of the people who was there to do the Torah reading. It was not necessarily like this sort of distinctified role the way it is now.
Does it have to be a minyan then to do?
To read Torah? Yes, publicly. Yeah, you can study Torah individually, but to do all this liturgy and the public reading of Torah with blessing, minyan. So, if our sort of base thing to start with is the act of reading Torah itself. The first prayers that are called for in sort of forming the Torah service liturgy would, as you might expect, be blessings before and after that Torah reading, the Torah and also the Haftarah readings. As we've seen in other prayer rubrics, the rabbis liked to bracket large liturgical citations of scripture with a blessing before and after. So we saw in Pesukei de Zimra, it starts with Baruch Shemar and a blessing over reading Torah. Then you got whole pastiche of verses, the daily Hallel, you got Ashrei and all the Hallelujahs, some more verses, and then a blessing on the end. All of Pesukei is like one big biblical reading, and there's a blessing on the beginning and end of it.
Now, is that what you're running through what you're going to fill up there?
Yeah.
That 1 is the blessing before and 5 is the blessing.
No, not quite. I'm just telling you what's going to go on there. We're going to fill in a blessing before and after reading Torah because that's what the rabbis like to do. You see that with Shema and Ve'ahavta and the 3 paragraphs of Shema. Another big biblical citation in a liturgical context. You got 2 blessings before and 1 after. That's how they do it. So the rabbis bracketed biblical readings with blessings. Blessing here, blessing there. We'll see the same here, a little blessing and a haftarah. Blessing. And a blessing. Okay. Originally, if you're probably looking at that and saying, yeah, that makes sense. We sort of run piece number 2 somewhere between 3 and 7 times. Blessing, reading, blessing, blessing, reading, blessing. However, that was not actually always originally the case. Originally, only people who could actually read from the Torah came up to do the Aliyah. They came up to the Aliyah. So the first person would say the opening blessing. Multiple people would read, and whoever was last would say the closing blessing. In some ways, makes more sense. Yeah. But once Torah reading was kind of semi-professionalized by these Baalei Koreh, these professional Torah readers who are really good at memorizing long swaths of Torah reading, there was nothing for the person coming up to do. They would come up and stand there while the Baalei Koreh read. So to give them something to do, they would bless before and after, and that became the essence of what you do for an Aliyah. That kind of makes sense? Which is how we know it today. You know, when you could be called for an Aliyah whether you know how to read or not, coming up to bless while someone else reads. And even though it's in many cases, there are still Baalei Koreh out there who get paid to read on Shabbat. That process, that arrangement maintains where someone else does the reading. Make sense? Possibly.
Oh, I'm just. I guess it sort of grinds on me that somebody is paid to come and professionally read Torah.
Yeah, it does feel a little strange when you feel like that's what's called for, and you don't necessarily have anyone capable of doing it. I think it's reasonable to compensate that person for their time.
Well, I think that's what cantors do. Chazan.
Well, yeah,
like
yeah,
Sure, yeah,
calling it something different.
Mm-hmm. If you're good at it, it's a good way to make some extra money on the side. I know folks who would fill in and do Torah readings on the side. I was never that good.
Well, and if you want to create an incentive for people to go off and do that study, then they have to be able to make their living that way too. I wonder. That's not the reason.
There's different kinds of, just different epochs.
Yeah.
Some people these days it's a thing to, learn how to read Torah yourself, and
Yeah. I think there's been that sort of democratizing impulse where it's more for something we can all participate in. So, yeah, and I think for a Reformed congregation, say, who doesn't actually see themselves as obligated to hear a full Torah reading, that doesn't hiring a Baalei Koreh doesn't make any sense. So they're just like, this is not something we need.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's why it's fallen out of favor in a lot of ways.
Probably not going to happen in Corvallis, though.
Probably not going to happen. Okay.
So, do we do a haftarah in all of the many versions?
The services here?
Yeah, we don't, do we?
No.
Okay.
Sim Shalom, yes.
No.
Or generally not. Bar Mitzvah, generally yes, but occasionally, depending on the student and things like that.
What Siddur they want to use, whether we do it or not.
Well, the haftarah appears in every Siddur.
Right.
It's more like, is the student able to prepare all of that?
Does the student want to?
Yeah, there's some flexibility there. It's part of my kind of holistic approach to Bar Mitzvah. But in theory, it's part of every Shabbat Torah service. I should point out, no haftarah on like your Mondays and Thursdays. Yeah, no haftarah Monday, Thursday, but it's basically a Shabbat morning or holiday morning thing. Yeah. Okay. So this is sort of the core of the Torah service. There's the reading, blessings before and after, and for the haftarah as well. We'll go into a little more detail about some of those later. But the rest of the Torah service, because everyone here has been through one, you know that this is not all there is to it. In terms of how the rest of this came together, because this is quite ancient, like I said, possibly as early as the 5th century BCE. Dating the rest of this is difficult because this grew slowly over time and differently in different communities. There's also no fixed halachic regulation to it the way there is with Amidah or Shema. We learn in the Mishnah that you got to say Amidah 3 times a day, and then it has to have 18 blessings, which are really 19, but we talked about that, right? We learned, Shema says in its own text that you're supposed to say it when you lie down and when you rise up. There's no such thing as that, so it took a long time to sort of standardize versus some of the other liturgical rubrics. And also the prayers in the rest of the Torah service grew without regard really for an overall plan or structure. The way we kind of conceptualize this as a service is a little bit arbitrary, as opposed to say the Amidah, where there was a clear structure: 3 blessings, 3 blessings at the beginning, 3 blessings at the end, all the ones in between. On Shabbat, it's shortened: 3 at the beginning, 3 at the end, 1 in between. We've talked about that. Like, there's a very set structure. This didn't have that. So it's easier to sort of read into the Amidah, for example, what is the intention here? It's possible to do that with the Torah service, but we got to acknowledge that it's a little bit arbitrary, and we're sort of probably injecting our own meanings into this too, which is fine, but just being honest about that. Okay. Still, it's helpful, like I said, to group into 5 separate discrete units and see that there is a natural flow to the way that the Torah service unfolds. I would say, in terms of the overall theme, the most important theme is community, which I think you'll see play out. Receiving Torah was the primary community event in Jewish history. I mean, we literally are told to understand ourselves as having stood at Sinai. When a person converts to Judaism, it's as if you stood at Sinai. We were all there, whether we're Jews or future Jews or past Jews or potential Jews. It's the primary community event, and it's effectively replicated every time we read Torah. Is that kind of that Sinai moment? So the service plays out a bit like this. There's the introduction, obviously, which has a number of components. I'm going to list them vertically here because I'm not going to write them all out sideways. The point here is really setting the stage for the drama to unfold. Like I said, as if standing at Sinai. There is some variation here, and we just don't have the space to go through every single little detail. Like much of the rest of the Shabbat service versus weekday services, the Shabbat one is more elaborate. There's a little bit more, there's a little extra material. But there's everything that's in the weekday service is in the Shabbat service, plus some extra, if that makes sense. So if I just tell you about what's in Shabbat, you'll recognize everything if you were at a weekday Torah reading. Does that make sense? Okay. So like I said, longer and more elaborate on Shabbat. You get a series of short prayers that praise God's might, God's mercy, which is of course evident in the gift of Torah that if we think back to the second blessing before Shema, Ahavat Rabbah, Ahavat Olam, which is called the Birkat Torah, the blessing over Torah. It's about the gift of Torah as a gift of love and mercy. That makes sense. It's right on theme, and that's expressed through verses from Psalms. You get a passage from Numbers chapter 10. You definitely don't have to write every little bit. That Vayihi B'Nsoach Ha'aron. This is all still on page 139. I'm just noting the texts because this one doesn't label them for you. Some seem to do. So Ein Kamocha is original liturgy, all the way through Vayihi B'Nsoach. So that's and some of those are Psalms. Ein Kamocha. That's some of those are lifted from the Psalms. Malchutecha, Malchut Kol Alamim, that's from Ashrei. You might recognize that from Psalm 145. So Vayihi B'Nsoach Aaron, that's Numbers. Ki Mitzion, that's from Isaiah 10. It's one of these sort of pastiche of, Isaiah 2. These kind of pastiche, collage is probably a better word, of Bible verses drawn from different places, all in the theme, recombined to make a coherent new unit. that's the introductory material, and as you can see from looking over the translation, all about God's kingship, but also compassion, goodness, things of that nature. An interesting element here, we saw the intrusion is not the right word, but the way the Kabbalists made their way into Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat, as we know, it is almost largely the work of the Kabbalistic tradition. We have another Kabbalistic insertion here from the Zohar. Note, and actually this is a great opportunity to demonstrate something. We saw this a little bit with the Kaddish. This is in Aramaic again. You can tell the difference because there's a lot of words that end in aleph that normally would end in hey in Hebrew. There's a lot of, it just seems generally like a lot of A's, things like that. So a passage from the Zohar in Aramaic.
So do we read that?
Generally, the tradition I've seen is to go quiet and
Okay.
daven it, but then we sing the end right at the box on 140, Be'an Araches. Be'an Araches, Belish Be'Kadishan, Be'Nishan Akira. Yep. This passage from the Zohar combines these two traits, might and mercy. Let's actually the Zohar. And then we're finally at the point where we can take the Torah in our hands. There's a little bit here for Yom Tov, for Shabbat, some additional verses. I'm going to give you the Shabbat version, not the full Yom Tov version. But you can see it's slightly different depending on the occasion. But then the Torah is taken from the Ark. And here's really the replication, I would say, of the Sinai moments. The leader is holding it, and they affirm God with three phrases. First, Shema, Echad Eloheinu, which is always used to trip me up as a kid because it's not the usual response to Shema that comes elsewhere. And it's slightly different, of course, on the holidays. And then Gadol Adonai Yiti, three proclamations, all affirming God. And then another, what we call a hakafa, the walk around, the march around with the Torah, which is more praising God. The translation there of L'cha Adonai, yours Adonai, it's greatness, the power, the splendor. It's just over the top praise language, almost as if the way we expect the Israelites might have reacted after receiving Torah at Sinai. Another fun side note: praise 3 times, 3 proclamations, and then hakafa. A really great word I learned while attending Jewish summer camp and playing baseball. Hakafa means a go around, so it's also the word for a home run. Playing baseball, it's a hakafa. At that point, of course, the Torah is placed on the reading table, and we do this cycle of bless, read, bless. We say repeat as necessary. For the occasion, as we said. There is a little bit more here, though. At the bottom of 141, there's a little bit for the Gabbai, or it says, as it says, the Torah reader to read, that summons people who are going to be called up for an aliyah. The familiar Torah blessings that the Olim say are on 142. There are some additions here that are infrequently added, but every now and then are actually somebody benched Gomel, as they say, last week. Birkat HaGomel here on 142 is for someone who has survived or escaped danger. There's a blessing at the bottom for a bar bat mitzvah. That's also a little bit out of step with the times because it's a blessing for the parents to say about how they're no longer responsible for their child. Not in the sense of not having to feed them, but the sense of not being charged of whether they do the mitzvah or not, but still, not necessarily the way we conceptualize bar bat mitzvah these days.
So that supposedly is one of the things that's the purpose of the bar bat mitzvah, that the individual becomes responsible for doing the mitzvah.
That is the essence of bar bat mitzvah, yes. Yeah. Yeah. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but it's a real common misconception that the key thing is the Torah reading itself, because that's what we make the kid work the hardest on. You can read Torah as a minor. We can fulfill our obligation to hear it. Well, there isn't actually a mitzvah to hear, but like anybody can come up and read. That's not the kind of thing you have to be 13 to do. You have to be 13 to say the blessing. Because that's the mitzvah, is to bless over Torah. And someone who's not obligated can't fulfill my obligation to bless. They can't fulfill me for my obligation. You have to be just as obligated in order to do it for me. So you're not obligated until you're 13. So we need them to be 13 so they can get us all out from under our obligation to bless. So that's actually the key element. Yeah. Which comes as a surprise to some 13-year-olds. But nonetheless is the truth. Many blessings, Misha Berach blessings, follow that for various circumstances. Evidently, this used to be a really like big part of the service. These were highly desired blessings, and people would compete for these kind of honors, so that they could receive blessings of this nature. Evidently, the Haftarah readers also wanted these blessings, but it was somehow felt that they couldn't be properly done later in the service at the Haftarah reading. So what happened was they gave the Haftarah reader an extra aliyah, what we call the maftir aliyah. So same root maftir, same root as Haftarah. It's the aliyah. It's actually an eighth one, specifically for the Haftarah reader. And that's the tradition, is that whoever's reading Haftarah comes up for that aliyah, and that gets to be included with these blessings. It's not part of the 7 of Shabbat, though. It is an eighth aliyah. So you'll see 146 a Kaddish, which is we've talked before, serves as kind of a verbal punctuation mark, saying what came before this is separate and different from what's coming after. You read your 7 aliyah, then you do a Kaddish to make sure that everyone knows this isn't, a 7th aliyah. This is the maftir one. You can call your Haftarah reader up to bless and receive Misha Berach blessing in turn. Yes.
I'm noticing that there's one for the parents of a newborn son and for the mother of a newborn son. Now, why a separate distinction? I'm on the bottom of 145.
Parents of a newborn daughter, mother of a newborn daughter, parents of a newborn son, mother of a newborn son. Why is it different?
Why is there a separate one for
the mother as opposed to the parents? I would presume it's a language. I'm just skimming it over. Yeah, I think that it's what it is. So the is there one for a father? No, there's not.
No, that's why I thought it's interesting.
Yeah, there's not one. There's not one for the father only. Is what you're saying?
It is the same language.
That's interesting.
Except for the pronoun, yeah.
Except for the pronoun, it's pretty much the same language.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
Probably because of matrilineal descent.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible, but I don't know why that would have anything to do with who gets the blessing. I mean, if both parents are Jewish.
Really needed blessings right after the birth.
Like you're suggesting there is no circumstance where the father would be there but not the mother. If dad's Jewish and mom's not, then the kid's not Jewish. You're right.
Right.
You're
That's
right.
what I was getting at.
Oh, okay. Okay. I can see that. So there's never a circumstance if you only recognize the child of a Jewish mother as Jewish.
Yes.
The child whose father's Jewish and mother's not isn't Jewish. So there's no circumstance where the father would be present but not the mother. I mean, of course, unless that actually happens, say mom dies or something like that. So I don't know why they made these choices. I would have to get in touch with the editors of this prayer book.
Because so this is unique to this prayer book as opposed to.
I don't know that. I would have to. There are definitely different ones. Like I'm pretty sure that like an Orthodox Siddur isn't going to have blessings for the mothers. I would
There's a
guess,
separate
but I don't
one
know.
for the well-being of the mother.
Yeah, but
Yeah, my guess is these are, like I said, these kind of blessings vary a lot between communities. There's probably different texts in different places. We could get a bunch of Siddurim and compare it, but I don't know the answer. Off the top of my head. Okay, so at this stage we've completed our Torah reading. We hold the Torah high and affirm the Zod HaTorah. This is the Torah. I'm going to move a little bit past that, but the Torah is rolled back up and placed to the side so that the Haftarah reading can commence. Has only a single blessing before, but a multiple part blessing after. You can see the blessing before. It's about 3.5 lines at the bottom of 146, whereas the blessing after takes up all of 147 and has special sections for it's customized according to the occasion, on Shabbat, on festivals, things of that nature. That's followed by section number 4, the prayers for the community, and there is even more variation in between prayer books and communities on what gets said here. But there is, a common factor to pretty much everything is some kind of communal blessing, where there is a series of individual blessings here, as part of a communal act. There's still blessings for the community of various kinds that but for generally over the community, for its leaders, for the country, for the state of Israel, for peace. Sometimes you'll see another Siddurim for soldiers. There's a blessing removed from here that you definitely would find in Orthodox Siddurim over martyrs, people killed for being Jewish. That was a much more common thing in previous eras than it is now, thank God. So significant variation in the prayers to the community. You'll bless and announce the new month here as well. Remember, this is the theme here is community. This is sort of announcement time. It's, we make our announcements at the end of things, but in a way, it almost makes more sense to make some of them here. And one of the most important ones that folks would need to know in an era before calendars is when's the new month coming, so they can all get on the same page. And finally, there's here actually we do have a memorial prayer for our martyrs. And here I think we routinely skip past these pages. But then a concluding set of liturgy. The rabbis loved Ashrei, which is Psalm 145 with a couple of verses of introduction. So we know it is Ashrei, so that it got inserted here again as well. Liturgy for returning the Torah to the Ark, which is another collage of Bible verses. Psalms appropriate for the Sabbath and for weekdays. And finally, really evoking what I'm arguing is kind of the overall conceit here of this has been a reception of Torah, and we've completed the Sinai moment. When the ark was set down, Moses would say, "Adonai, you dwell among the myriad families of the people of Israel." The idea is we have the Torah, God's presence is dwelling among us, and we're setting the Torah down and rest until next time to reenact this. So, like I said, it combines some diverse material, but the themes again are rejoicing in the Torah and praising God. Let's see, Torah. Overall, the Torah service is, I think, saturated with the idea of community, celebrations of Jewish community, and not even just immediate community. Like it's reflected, immediate community is reflected here, but community collectively across time. The Torah is brought into the midst of the people. It's not a performance that's observed from afar. You can do it. You can't just have one person do this whole service, which is really interesting. Like none of the other parts, like Pazukah de Zimra, Shema and Amidah can be done by one person, can be led by one person. You need a team of people up here. You need at least two. Someone should be the leader, and someone should be the reader. I guess it's theoretically possible, but it's a chaotic mess. And so the liturgy doesn't even work. How are you supposed to call yourself up for a blessing? Like that doesn't. It's deliberately designed to be a communal thing, communal effort. And it's reflects our values. The Torah is supposed to be engaged with. The principle of lo b'shamayim hi, it's not in heaven, it's here on earth with us, is like very operative here. You're supposed to, you get a chance to touch it as it goes by. You get a chance, at some level, to interact with it. Part of the holding the scroll up is so that everyone can see the inside of it. That all reflects this idea of communal acceptance and affirmation.
And isn't it sort of a replication of the Torah being given at Sinai?
Yeah, I think it said that. Yes.
In terms of it's brought around the congregation.
Yeah, I think so. In the sense like here's Moses coming down from the mountain, going amongst people. Yeah, I think there is an aspect of physically embodying that. Yeah, absolutely. So, questions about the Torah service before we move on to Hallel? Awesome. So I gotta get moving here. Okay. So on holidays and Rosh Chodesh, another special feature you'll find besides Torah reading is an additional unit of Psalms. Psalms 113 through 118 called Hallel. So it comes after Amidah, before the Torah service. So we actually got to go a little bit backwards here. Hallel in this book starts on, there's a little introduction to it on 132, and it begins on 133. You can look at the little intro if you want. Some of that I'm going to cover myself, but it's laid out there for you. And then the unit itself starts on 133. So this is another one of the oldest prayers in our liturgy, not only because the text is biblical itself. It's just Psalms, nothing else to it. We know that it was recited as a unit, actually, even during the Second Temple era. The Levites who ran the temple service would recite exactly this passage of Psalms on festival occasions. So even before the other prayers of the service were fixed, this had been singled out for being a holiday, a piece of holiday liturgy. Like pretty much everything else after the destruction of the temple, it was transferred into the synagogue service, which makes a lot of sense. Remember the temple, and also a basis for halachic prayer as we know it. The original recitation of Hallel, I told you what Psalms, right? 113 through 118, was only on what they call the Shlosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. That is Shavuot, each day of Sukkot, all 7 days of Sukkot, which, as it points out here, has a special ritual to go along with it, with waving the lulav and etrom, and the first day of Pesach. Note, Pesach, also a 7-day holiday, no Hallel on those other days. Why not? Why not during Chol HaMoed Pesach? Why not also on things like Rosh Chodesh? That's a good question. Eventually in the diaspora, and there's a story about a rabbi from the land of Israel going to Babylon and seeing the people there starting to recite Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, and he's almost going to stop them, but they make a difference. For those, they do something a little bit different in Hallel. It makes it different from the full Hallel for the holidays, and that is, if you look ahead a little bit, you can see on top of 134 and 135, it says the following passage is omitted on Rosh Chodesh and the last 6 days of Pesach, and that is the beginning of Psalm 115 and the beginning of Psalm 16. So the innovation, basically, and the idea is, I think that they realized that they thought that there needed to be Hallel on the rest of Pesach because it didn't mirror Sukkot the way they thought it would. And they thought it also belonged on Rosh Chodesh, but they knew it was an innovation, and so they weren't going to do it the full way. They were going to do it with a little bit of a difference, so that to make a distinction. So when someone says full Hallel, they mean the entirety of Psalms 113 to 118. When they either say short Hallel or half Hallel, something like that, that's without these two little passages. It's not that much shorter, but a little bit shorter, such that it's different from what you do on full holiday. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Interestingly, Hanukkah, not a Chag. There's no restriction on work or cooking or anything like that. But we do say Hallel, which is interesting in the story of Hanukkah, which is coming up. One of the reasons, the reason Hanukkah is 8 days, predating the miracle of the oil story, which came in the rabbinic era well after the period of the Maccabees. While the temple was occupied by the Assyrians, they missed out on celebrating Sukkot. That was while they were busy hiding the caves and fighting and stuff like that. So when they liberated the temple and rededicated it, the first thing the Maccabees wanted to do was celebrate Sukkot. So they effectively did Sukkot, not in Tishrei, but in Kislev. That's why it lasts 8 days, because Sukkot was 8 days, 7 plus Shmini Atzeret. And that's why Hallel on Hanukkah, because we did it on Sukkot. So Hanukkah has lost its sort of para-Sukkot character otherwise, but we kept the Hallel. Cool, right? And in the modern era, as it pointed out in that intro as well, it's also said in many communities on Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day, and in some communities on Yom Yerushalayim, which is the anniversary of the liberation of Jerusalem, or the reunification of Jerusalem in the 6 Day War. Interesting theological proposition here, reciting Hallel on, and especially in light of what I'm going to tell you this is really about. Interesting theological proposition, reciting Hallel on the birthday of Israel. It definitely says something about your understanding of that day to feel that that's necessary or called for. I know people who do it. I know people who don't do it. Historically speaking, this community has, but I can understand why you would not, if that makes sense. Okay. In terms of Hallel's content, as you would expect for any extended scriptural reading in a liturgical context, we get what before and after? A blessing, right? Okay. So, of course, it starts with a blessing, but you would think you would get something more, but that's not what we get. What we get is one of those short blessings, a mitzvah blessing, that, just like the kind you would say before lighting candles on Shabbat. It's Baruch Atah Adonai, et cetera, who sanctifies us with mitzvot, Asher Ketanu Mitzvotav. Tzivanu commands us to read the Hallel, right? So it's a mitzvah blessing. And I think what this is saying Hallel isn't just reading scripture. It's not the same as the Haftarah, even though this is from Nach, the way Haftarah is. It's not reading scripture for the sake of public proclamation, reading and proliferation of scripture. It's performing a ritual commandment, just the way lighting candles is. Like the commandment itself is to do the physical act of reading Hallel, which is actually important. That's part of the halakha of Hallel. It's obligatory on anyone who's there participating to say it. So it's the kind of thing a leader can't just say for you. So you're supposed to read all the words of it as well. That's an individual obligation. So the commandment is to acknowledge through the Hallel's words, like that. The Hallel isn't the thing itself; it's I don't want to say tool, but it's almost the tool or the vehicle. Sort of the way lighting candles is, symbolic recognition of the beginning of Shabbat. This is that. What we're supposed to do is recognize and thank God for God's mercies and miracles throughout history, and you can see how some of those are brought into the Hallel's content. But the text itself is just a function. It's just a tool to use. The point is not actually the reading of it, if that makes sense. Or the point is not the content. The point is the reading of it.
So is the reading of the Hallel one of the 613 commandments?
Yes, I think so. I don't know the whole list. We can look that up.
Yeah.
You don't.
It would if it has a. My guess is yes. My guess is yes, that it would be considered deoraita. But also, I don't know. I'll look that one up.
Okay.
I mean, 613 is the mitzvot that are from the Torah, what they call deoraita in Aramaic. There are more mitzvot that are derabbanan,
Oh,
that are commanded by the rabbis.
Right.
It could be that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's more than 613.
thank goodness.
Right?
I didn't have enough.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So in terms of the content, there are these 6 psalms. It's doubtful that they were written, even though they appear consecutively in the book of Psalms, it's doubtful they were written as a unit to be recited together, because each seems to have its own individual theme. But taken together, they form a very appropriate unit. So it seems like they were probably composed separately and somebody brought them together to form this unit with some intention. The first one, 113, I'm just going to kind of go briefly over their content. We're not going to read them all inside, but to give you an idea of the arc here, the kind of what's being sketched out. 113 is effectively an elaborate call to prayer. It's a call to the people to perform the act of prayers. It says in command form verbs, sing praises, you servants of God. Let God be praised, right? So it effectively acts as the opening salvo, the call to prayer. Psalm 114 at the bottom of page 133 describes the Exodus, when Israel, B'tzeit Israel miMitzrayim, and Israel left the land of Egypt, which is the historical core of all of the festivals. It's the reason we have festivals. Pesach is the moment of liberation. Shavuot, it's all related to that. Psalm 115 on the following page is a liturgical composition for a particular occasion, which is when the people would flock to the temple to seek assurance of their victory. It seems like they're about to come up against some sort of perhaps war or conflict with another nation. Like, why should the nation say, where is their God? We want to be assured that we're going to win here. So God, remember us, increase your blessings, because we can't praise you if we're dead. Remember, we will praise God now and forever. And it's actually a dialogue in between the people and the Levites. At least seems to be what's going on. The conceit seems to be the people are all there, and the Levites, the people are talking, and they're helping reassure people on behalf of God. So again, makes sense in light of the occasions on which we say Hallel, like Hanukkah, right? All of the festivals themselves. Psalm 116 is an individual psalm. It's all in first person singular language. It's an individual who's been saved from death and describes their terrible ordeal and the way in which God came to the rescue. I think within the liturgical framework, it's a metaphor for the people of Israel in their time of trouble, that we were really in deep, and God, you really came through. Like I said, as an individual prayer, it doesn't really make sense here. I think metaphorically, as we're saying for the people of Israel, makes sense. This was probably composed in another context and brought here. 117 is very short. You can see it's right there at the top. It's just 2 lines. But introduces the theme of giving thanks to God for God's mercies, which is the theme of all of Psalm 118, which follows. Has that familiar back and forth refrain, Hodu Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Praise God, for God is good, God's love endures forever. Also written in the first person singular and is patterned after the Song of the Sea, which appears in Exodus, the song that we have the Israelites singing after crossing and escaping Pharaoh. So it's patterned after that, and it depicts the thanksgiving of the people having emerged triumphant from the time of peril and danger. So sort of the flow we have here is a call to pray and praise, the sort of core problem that we faced with Exodus, seeking assurance of triumph, praise for escaping our ordeal, and then Hallel, thanks and praise and triumph on the other side. So there is a story created by these three, it's sort of thematic story created by these 6 psalms together. That make sense? Cool. That's about all I have to say about Hallel. It's a bit underrated, I would say. I think it's really fun because usually people do. There are kind of standard melodies to it, but also a lot of folks, at least me and my friends in rabbinical school, would like to do Hallel to thematically, seasonally appropriate melodies. Like if it's Hanukkah, we do it to Ma'otzur and Oh Hanukkah, and I have a little dreidel and stuff like that. We did one. Israel had just won the Eurovision Song Contest, so we did a Hallel that was all Eurovision winning melodies, like Hallelujah. We thought we were so clever. Anyway. And finally, of course, a blessing at the end, which is a little bit more elaborate than previously, but still ends with Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mechulal B'Tishbachot, praised are you, sovereign, acclaimed with the songs of praise. These sort of backward looking. We did all this praising. We're going to put the capstone on the end with a bracketing blessing here. Questions about Hallel?
I don't think that Hallel is done very much in Reform Judaism.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Why? There's probably a number of reasons. I mean, in general, the Reform movement was concerned with service length overall, and so they cut a lot of stuff to make it, the kind of thing that folks in busy modern lives could come and do. I would suspect there's probably an aspect of it being a little bit, somewhat theologically problematic for them. It is a little bit more. It is a bit, I suppose, like it acknowledges God as active in history and responding to outcries and stuff like that, which,
right,
I think is uncomfortable for some modern theologies. Those would be my top 2 guesses.
I like that.
It's, in theory, to do it, like the saying of it in its entirety is the mitzvah itself. So there wasn't a lot of room for, folks who might saying it in English was never going to work.
Right.
You can't fulfill your mitzvah and say Hallel by saying it in
an
English.
abridged version.
Yeah, you can't abridge it except that one in that one way.
Right.
On Rosh Hashanah. You can't say it in translation and still get there. So those would be my guesses, but I don't know. I'm not
curious. Yeah, it's always one of the things I've noticed when I encountered.
Which, like I said, I think is too bad because it's some really cool liturgy and it's really fun to sing. And the more you do it, I think a running theme through all of this has been the more you know the baseline, the more you can appreciate when something's different. My dad's a big jazz player, so you got to have a melody line that everybody knows in order to appreciate the improvisation around the melody line, right? So you got to know Hallel in order to appreciate when I do something clever, like use Eurovision songs.
Right.
So,
Sure.
Anyway, but like we've been saying, you got to know, what weekday shacharit is like, so you can appreciate what's different about Shabbat shacharit.
Oh, sure.
So Reform Judaism, English is typically or only used?
No, there's a substantial amount, but it depends on the congregation.
Yeah.
Frankly, it depends on how tolerant they are of and knowledgeable they are about Hebrew.
Readers?
Yeah.
Historically speaking, 100 plus years ago, it was all in English. It was a big reaction against Hebrew. Like they wanted to pray almost entirely in vernacular. Hebrew has worked its way back in over time.
Mm-hmm.
There are many, I would say, Reformed services that are at least half, if not more, if not predominantly Hebrew.
Well, and over my life, that trajectory has changed quite a bit. I mean, when I was a teenager and before, there was really not that much Hebrew in services, and then there was a purposeful movement by leadership in Reform circles to start adding more and more Hebrew in, to the point where if you did it like they wanted to all at once, there was a radical reaction by the congregations. So as a rabbi, you would have to like add it in a little bit at a time over a period of a few years.
Very interesting if the original genesis of that kind of congregation was to eliminate.
Right, but you have to understand that time frame was 1895.
Yeah.
That he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a big diversion
Any
from where we're at
version,
today, but yeah, I think that reflects what a lot of people understood. Like there was sort of reform was a reaction against orthodoxy and against that kind of anti-modernism, but there was a realization that gave away too much in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That completely dispensing with all of the old forms felt not Jewish enough in a lot of ways.
Right, exactly.
It lost a lot of that kind
That's
of
why
mystique.
God started being added back in.
Yeah.
I have a Reformed Siddur
Mhm.
from like 1946.
Sure.
And it amazed me because as I was going through, looking at it, it didn't look anything like the Siddur we've been talking about.
That's right.
And it had, it has like, I think 3 different services or something like that. That's all there is.
Yeah, that was one of the early ideas about how to make prayer more, how to sort of reach people a little bit more in a more customized way, was to give different service options. Like there was a sort of a natural service that had like kind of natural themes and stuff like that. There were different ones, but the reality is they realized that didn't work because each congregation would just pick the one they like and do that one every time.
Yeah.
And you actually didn't end up getting the variety that they hoped to get. Newer Reformed Siddurim have sort of a collage of different themes on one page, so you can sort of wind your own way through and given. That's actually a really good segue because I want to move towards kind of wrapping up and putting a bow on this whole thing. And I wanted to do that by telling you a story about me and my Reformed prayer book. So I grew up in the Reformed synagogue, of course, and on my first day of rabbinical school at Hebrew College, I came into the Beit Midrash there where everyone was davening shacharit, and they were already underway at that point. Someone was already up there leading in a fairly traditional davening style. The leader, sort of saying the first few words out loud to let us know where they were, and then it was mumble, 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 mumble as everybody read, and then they'd say out loud the chatimah, the end of the blessing at the end of each paragraph, and everyone would say amen, and we go on to the next thing. So it was that style, and I came in a very helpful, well-meaning, probably higher year student, directed me towards the shelf that had all the Siddurim on it, and there was a collection of a bunch of different ones, different Siddurim to choose from. They said, just pick one that pick one that you're comfortable with. So I went to grab the Mishkan Tefillah, the Reformed Siddur off the shelf, and I sat with it, and I realized very quickly that everything they're saying up there is not in here. That this is not going to be adequate. There's a lot that I don't know, and that I didn't know what I didn't know. Still, and I looked around me, and I had my Mishkan Tefillah, and I looked around and saw everyone around me with a different prayer book. There were Korans and art scrolls and Sim Shaloms and all sorts of different things. But everyone in the community was praying together and intensely praying together, despite having their own, each their own book. And I realized a couple of important things, but mainly that I would need to read and study all this stuff very carefully and practice extensively. And then ultimately I was responsible. That I had a choice about how to navigate this, this new scenario. They told me like pick a book that you want, pick the one that you want, and I knew that I was going to have to figure out how to make the choice for myself. So recall that there are 2 essential elements of halachic prayer, right? Kevan and kavanah. We talked about this all the way back in the very first session. Kavanah is it's from the root that means to incline your heart, right? It's the intention, the inner directedness of your heart in prayer, right? It's the part that you bring that's different every time, that's personal, that's individual to you, that's driven by your feelings, and it's different from time to time. And there's also the keva, that's the fixity, the predictability, the order of things. It's the words that are in the book, right? It's the peace that's the same no matter when you come. We've talked about how halachic prayer requires both, and how a lot of the evolution of Jewish prayer was about bringing those into balance. If you have only keva, like only fixity, it's just empty words. Like it's reading without feeling an emotion. It feels hollow. There's no way that can accomplish anything real. If you have only keva, if you have only kavanah, there can't be any community because everyone is doing their own individual thing. There's no way to be together in any meaningful way. So there are two important understandings, I think, that set you up for success in prayer, and by that I mean success in having a moving spiritual experience. And they're related to those two essential elements of halachic prayer. So I think keva is the roadmap. It's the answer to questions like, where are we right now? What's being said right now? What's coming up next? And you can mostly acquire the keva aspect, the sort of understanding of what's going on in a service, like the roadmap element. You can mostly acquire that through practice and just showing up and imitating what the people around you are doing. A lot of people get that far. That's one of the elements of, I think, success. You got to know what's going on. You got to sort of have some sense of the roadmap. But the other element that's really crucial is the kavanah. It's the intention. It's understanding not just where we're at, but what are we trying to accomplish while we're here? How does what we're reading right now serve that goal? What's the point of this? And that really can't be acquired without instruction or study and reflection, the kind of work that we're doing here. So I think there's a faulty assumption, and it's the one I came into the Beit Midrash with on that first day, that the prayer leader is responsible for my spiritual experience. It's a really common assumption, I think, in the American Jewish community, that whoever is leading, frequently the rabbi, is responsible for everyone's spiritual experience. That's not true, but it's certainly not exclusively true. But that faulty assumption is reinforced by things like the diversity of prayer experiences across movements, the idea that if I don't find what I want here at the Reform Shul, I'll go to the conservative one next door, or whatever. It's reinforced by professionalization of rabbinic leadership. I've had people literally say to me, "I didn't know you could have a service without a rabbi."
You're in town?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. There are people who think you need a rabbi to have a service.
People in Corvallis?
Oh, I don't know. No, not technically in Corvallis, but since I've been here in Corvallis, there are people who think you need a rabbi. It's reinforced the fact by, I think, that when you walk into most services, you're presented with a selection of identical Siddurim. You don't get what I had when I walked to the Beit Midrash, which is this Siddurim from a bunch of different movements and eras and all this stuff, and freedom to select. We use Sim Shalom in this service. Here's a Sim Shalom. We use Kol HaNeshama in the service. Here's a Kol HaNeshama. We use a Mishkan Tefillah. Here's a Mishkan. It gives the impression that you don't have any agency over your path, over your spiritual experience there. You're just supposed to go along with whatever the leader is doing. But the reality is, Jewish prayer is an individual obligation as well as a group effort, right? It's one of the things we've established at numerous points is that there's an individual obligation to recite the Amidah. That's why there's a silent recitation of it. And there's also a group element of it where as a community we recite the Amidah and we do it out loud. That's why there's a repetition by the leader, at least in traditional services. We talked about a big communal element with the Torah service. Like the whole edifice is constructed though in a way that it can't be done for you. Like you have to interact in Jewish prayer. You can't just sit there as if it's a performance. You can't just have it done for you and expect to have both the keva and the kavanah. Like at best, the prayer leader can provide a keva framework that's navigable and inject as much as they can in terms of kavanah, but you have to meet them at some point with your own kavanah. And this course has superficially been about Keva. Like I've talked a lot about the structure of the service and the elements of it, but by going over those rubrics. But I think really it's actually been more about Kavanah, because what we've talked about is the intention that was put into these pieces of liturgy, right? We talked about what they're trying to accomplish more than just what they are. We didn't really read much of this inside. I didn't really help you in terms of understanding, reading comprehension, reading along with the service. But I helped you understand when you get to any given point in the service, what you're supposed to be feeling. I'm going to put supposed in scare quotes, but what the composers of the liturgy were trying to convey to you, what they were trying to get you to feel at any given point. And that's them sort of reaching out their kavanah for you to meet with yours. So I hope that you can use that knowledge, the knowledge of what's the point of all this, of what the liturgy is trying to say to you, or the journey it's trying to take you on, what it's trying to get you to feel. I hope you can use that knowledge to empower your own agency over your own spiritual experience. And don't take for granted that prayer leaders, myself included, are going to be able to do that for you. The other big thing I learned in the Hebrew College Beit Midrash was not only that I was that I needed to be responsible for myself, but that it was a relationship of trust between everyone involved. I had to trust that the leader was not going to leave me behind and was going to lead me through in a framework that made sense for me to inhabit. And the leaders had to trust me as well as all the other individuals in the room that we were going to take things in our own hands as necessary and get what we need, because they can't be looking out for everyone, at the same time while also trying to pray themselves. So that's something I realized is this is a trust relationship, and the more that prayer leaders are able to know that individuals in their community understand their own agency, the better they're able to concentrate on creating the keva container, filling it with their kavanah, and trusting that you can get what you need, if that makes sense. Like if you need more time someplace than I'm giving you, then take it. Just dwell longer in your Amidah, on reciting your Shema, whatever you need to do. You want to just sit quietly and don't do anything at all. Like you have agency to do that in a prayer service. And I hope that I've given you some of the tools to go exploring that agency. Thank you so much for learning along with me. Folks who've made it to all or nearly all of the sessions, thanks for committing your Tuesday nights to me. Thanks for folks who have made it this far watching the videos. You're probably at least 8 hours, maybe 9 hours deep at this point. I appreciate you sticking with us. And thanks very much. Hatzlacha, good luck.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
I can tell you a story.
Please. I